Hi, I'm Jeffrey Sipe. I want to welcome you back to Movie Reviews for Boomers. I'm going to take a quick look today at a movie that got a new lease on life with the arrival of COVID-19 last spring. Steven Soderbergh's 2011 Contagion experienced a huge resurgence in popularity, going from an also-ran on Warner Brothers lists of most downloaded and most rented videos to the top spot on that same list as the pandemic took hold last, February, March. Now, all things considered, that really shouldn't come as much of a surprise, but Contagion also represents an interesting example of how our perception of a film is influenced directly by the world outside the film. That world ranges, of course, from where you may be sitting in a theater when you watch that film, to whether you slept well the night before, to whether people around you are talking, to whether your spouse just walked out on you. All this stuff tends to color the way you see movies and just about everything else, for that matter. But we're living in a world today that directly mirrors much of what transpires in Contagion. And this world we are living in today is quite different from the one that we were living in 2011. Back then, Contagion was vaguely science fiction or maybe speculative fiction, and according to some, it was just a thriller. But like Birth of a Nation or Gone with the Wind, Contagion looks very different in retrospect. Watching it today, it no longer proposes a potential future. It feels as if it's depicting real-life events. It's gone from fiction almost to nonfiction. Now, in a nutshell, Contagion details the spread of a virus that appears to have originated in Hong Kong and migrated to America with Beth Imhoff, a businesswoman played by Gwyneth Paltrow. Beth becomes infected while on a business trip to Hong Kong and Macau, and upon her return home, she unwittingly passes the virus on, prompting untold personal, professional, and ultimately social upheaval. Beth and her young son, who is anxiously awaiting her return home and eagerly embraces her as soon as she passes through the front door, are among the very first to die. So about 15 minutes into the film, Paltrow's character is on the autopsy table. Now, whatever you may think of Paltrow and her current goop days, you gotta hand it to her for headlining a film that kills her off and peels away her scalp just as things are getting started. Now, Paltrow is far from the only big name in this film. There's, Matt Damon, Lawrence Fishburne, Marion Cotillard, Kate Winslet, Elliot Gould, Bryan Cranston, and Jude Law. So a lot of star power. Contagion, as edgy as it is a clear product of Hollywood. Production values are, of course, top-notch. In contrast to the dire circumstances within the film, the cinematography, which was done by Soderbergh under an assumed name, is almost, in my opinion, voluptuous. And the soundtrack is designed specifically to ratchet up the tension. You barely notice it at first, but when you do, you realize just how powerfully effective it really is. Add to that the parallel editing that pulls together numerous interrelated stories, and Contagion makes for a tightly constructed procedural with all of the characters serving very specific ends. Now, the film's been criticized for a lack of character development, and I think that's a valid criticism, but the precision of the narrative overpowers that shortcoming. After all, it was never intended to be a character study. It is, however, a melodrama, and at times it is overly melodramatic, despite its overall realistic take on a viral pandemic. If you saw Contagion in 2011, you saw a well-constructed procedural with threads of horror and suspense mixed all the way through it. But if you watch it today, the experience is very different. For one, the vocabulary of pandemics has become part of our shared lexicon. We have a visceral reaction to an early montage of fingers touching computer screens and keyboards, credit cards and cash changing hands, and innocent hugs exchanged among friends and family members. And we are fully aware of the deadly significance of Paltrow's character blowing on a Japanese colleague's chips in a Macau casino. We also immediately recognize the onset of symptoms, and our hearts sink as Paltrow's and then Winslet's character, an epidemic intelligence service officer from the CDC, begin to cough, turn feverish, and struggle to breathe. It is indeed uncomfortably familiar. There are also narrative threads that follow the struggles of the CDC and WHO to identify the virus, isolate it, and figure out how it works. Does that sound familiar? Well, it certainly should. If there is one glaringly false note in Contagion, it would have to be the kidnapping of the Marion Cotillard character, a WHO doctor, by members of a small Chinese village who hold her hostage in an attempt to ensure that they get the first vaccine available. The whole subplot struck me as far-fetched, and Cotillard's thin performance really doesn't help things out any. Even the staging of the abduction is weak and frankly, not really very believable. But much more believable is Lawrence Fishburne as the CDC's Dr. Ellis Cheever, who finds himself under investigation after it is discovered that he advised his significant other to leave Chicago prior to the public announcement of the imposition of a quarantine there. That revelation comes from the Jude Law character, a digital journalist and conspiracy theorist. Law's character also publicly and insistently touts the benefits of forsythia, a drug that, like hydroxychloroquine, has produced no clinical evidence of efficacy. I took a look at Roger Ebert's review of Contagion from 2011, in which he criticized the inclusion of the character because, in his words, the subplot doesn't interact with the main storylines and functions mostly as an alarming but vague distraction. Now, solely within the context of the film, that's arguably correct. But in 2020, Law's character is depressingly familiar. What looked like The Fringe in 2011 comes across as far more menacing today. When we watch Contagion today, we're not watching other people. We're watching ourselves and the world that we live in. Now, many of you have no doubt seen Contagion, either recently or back when it was first released in 2011, but if you haven't, be sure to block out a couple of hours and watch it. It's well worth your time. It's both frightening and eye-opening. Okay, boomers, and everyone else, of course, stay safe. And then maybe, hopefully, I'll see you at the movies again sometime very soon. Again, this is Jeffrey Sipe for Movie Reviews for Boomers. Thanks for dropping by, and hope to see you again real soon.